the World Bank report on South Africa came out this week. We are flirting with stagnation, if not recession, it said. And then Moody's jumped on the bandwagon and gave our banks a bleak outlook. Talk about kicking a country when it's down.
Absolutely, and we're going to get into those conversations and more. Let's start off with the World Bank. For me, Lesiba, this one was a little bit more sobering than before. I think the World Bank is always releasing outlooks but in the interview that we had, I think her name was...
No, you shouldn't do that. You know, if you're not sure of the name...
You should come up with the name.
Well, I can't remember.
Yeah. Catriona, there we go. So when we spoke to Catriona, one of the things that she said was that if we continue on this economic trajectory that we're on now, by next year, not far, next year, 37% of the population will be officially living below the poverty line. We then asked, what's your definition of poverty for South Africa? She says that's less than 500 rands a month. That's 37% of the population. It sounds, it's not just an economic crisis, it's a political and social crisis too.
Yeah, that particular one was very sobering. Similarly, that's how I felt when I looked at it. They also talk about per capita GDP, because we can always talk about the headline growth, you know, the number that they put out, which is less than 1%. But per capita GDP, in the early 2000s, South Africa was $8,000 per capita GDP. We're now sitting at 6.5, all right? At the early 2000s, we were better than Chile, we were better than China, we were better than Mauritius. So what has happened is we're going down and all these countries have surpassed us. Because of the drought alone, and this came from that report, about 50,000 people are going to be sent out of jobs, and that's the most vulnerable part of society. They can't re-skill themselves without great effort. You can't really re-engineer their skill set into a different industry without enormous effort. So where we are, it's really quite a situation where my appeal is to say someone ought to stop this decline. It's in our faces and we're just watching it happen. We are at the brink of a non-investment grade downgrade. In other words, to be downgraded into junk. It's imminent. And what I see, there's good conversations happening, right? The finance minister is going around speaking to 60 CEOs to avert this downgrade. There's just so many issues that we cannot just stare them and do nothing.
And a lot of it sounds like putting lipstick on the pig. Because behind it all, we know that certain things are not going to happen. There's not going to be more flexibility. There's not going to be policy changes in certain areas. Rabi, what I always am struck by is that whoever gives these forecasts, next year is always better than this year. Even though all the evidence suggests next year could be worse.
Yeah, exactly.
They said 1.1% for next year, 0.8 this year. The way they're talking, where's the reason to have 1.1% growth next year?
Exactly. No, well, I mean, I think it's, you know, when you look at, this is sort of maybe an unfair criticism, maybe Lesiba can also just back me up here. But so some of the, you know, some of these sort of the World Bank or maybe the IMF, right, when you compare their forecasts or their outlooks, for example, versus the banks or brokers or, you know, sort of private economists and so forth, you know, you almost feel like they're always, you know, maybe 12, 18 months behind in their forecasts. I think maybe, you know, from a commercial perspective, you know, the banks, if you're seeing a bleak outlook, the ultimate purpose is to still make it commercial and say, well, fine, if things are going to be slow, where the opportunity is going to be then, or how best can you protect yourself?
Rabi? I mean, I think that's a very interesting insight. Where does that stagnation come from? Why are they lagging behind so much with the analysis?
Well, you know, when you look at these guys, you know, they have a global view, you know, versus guys that are on the ground in South Africa. So like Lesiba, for example, I would easily argue is closer to the action because he's on the ground in South Africa versus someone sitting in Europe, part of a global federation, right? So, no, well... But
Lesiba, we're coming to the State of the Nation address.
Right.
We're coming up to the budget.
Yes.
People are saying, well, Pravin Gordhan's more powerful than he ever was before, given what's happened.
Okay.
He's got to deliver something. He has to deliver something special here. It's a very high wire act, but he's got to deliver. On the other hand, the president, the view is that his political capital is drained away.
Yeah.
He's not as powerful as he was. What are you expecting from this month when it comes to those two big moments?
I'll start with the finance minister. You know, when you have pent-up hope Murphy's Law tend to be the order of the day, which is where we are as a country. And I don't want to sound overly pessimistic. Just the detail of what Gordon is working with is a difficult situation. We have been told we're firmly in a nuclear deal situation. That's new expenditure that's going to be put. We are told, you can see in the philosophy and how it's run, that state-owned enterprises, I'll be very surprised if I get a situation where part of SAA gets privatized or any of the other. I'll be very surprised if that happens just because of the rhetoric. So the detail of what we're working on suggests that it's a difficult situation and the trend ought to be altered with guts. And I don't know if that guts are there to make sure that we don't go to non-investment grade, to make sure that we don't spend 470 billion rands on guarantees on state-owned enterprises. So I'm not all that convinced. I actually think the situation requires a lot more than just talk, because we can talk and the deeds don't match, the disappointment is going to be greater.
I think that's a great question that you've asked that I actually want to throw for once. It doesn't happen often. So to pick it up, Rabi, as well, because we're getting the point of view from an economist to say, this is what I'm expecting, this is what I'd like. But from your position as a trader, what are you looking for? Are you even following the SONA? And if so, what are the big issues that you expect to see out of the SONA and the budget as well?
Well, I mean, I think just from a rhetoric perspective, a lot of things like Lesiba mentioned have been talked about. Pravin Gordon's mentioned certain things about potential budget cuts, which would bode well. So I think from us, just looking at what the currency's done in the last few weeks, you know, from a trading perspective and just speaking to clients, there was a lot of feeling that, you know, the rand really is just too cheap at that sort of 1650, 1660 level. And the guys who took that view have done very well, you know, since, obviously helped by the weaker dollar. So we're basically looking for confidence. You know, I work in an environment where it's sentiment driven, where it's confidence driven. So we just need, you know, positive statements first, and then, you know, like Lesiba said, guts to really pull the trigger and really, you know, make some hard decisions.
But, you know, you come back to the credibility. And the big thing where the credibility was lost last time was on the state wage bill. And they said they're going to keep it at 6%. And then it ended up 7.5%. In some cases, much higher than that. So you thought, well, if such a big statement was made, to pick up your point, that we are going to do this, not we're battling to do it, we'll try, but we are going to do this, and then they don't. So it's not so much what they say, it's the credibility gap that has to be bridged.
Indeed, that ought to happen. I do think, you know, if I was the finance minister, I'll have a few iterations of this speech that needs to be put. I'll put all the stakeholders, you know, to criticize and give input to what needs to happen, because I would argue is one of the most important policy that needs to be put out since 1994.
Have we overlooked the unions though? Because to come back to your point, I mean, there's a lot of moving parts, and I think the unions flex their muscles, in particular around the public wage bill. And I'm not hearing a lot from the unions in favor of what government is doing now. And I'm getting a sense that this month is going to be particularly tough, because I think the unions are going to be out to make a point as well.
It's not easy, and I see that. I see the difficulty in the conversation. But let's put the country first. I did some study to look at, if you get downgraded to junk, how long does it normally take you to come out? Colombia was 12 years.
Wow.
Romania was 6 years. But South Korea in 97 was only 12 months because they were agile in their responses. But the other outcome was, all these countries that I've given you, when they were downgraded to junk, they received an IMF bailout because that's how hectic it becomes. I'm not saying that's the outcome that South Africa will face.
Don't we have the BRICS Bank? Isn't that taken care of? Isn't Nene supposed to be there?
He still needs to be invited. He still needs to be offered a job and sign.
He hasn't seen anything.
He hasn't seen.
Wait, Rabi, let's pick up on that, and in particular the possible downgrade that everybody is talking about. The future of the cost of capital for South Africa, should that downgrade come through? Do we have what it takes to be a South Korea in response, or are we likely to be, what was the 12?
Colombia.
A Colombia in our response?
No, look, I mean, just we had one of our economists actually this week. We hosted a lunch with some investors, and he raised a very interesting point.
No, we didn't. No, I didn't remember seeing it in my inbox.
I also didn't get the invite, so it's a really tough one to crack. And he mentioned an interesting one. I don't know what Lesiba might think of, but just raising the fuel levy about R2, okay, could actually solve a lot of government's issues at the moment in terms of the extra cash flow. You could argue the consumer and where we are in the cycle. But the fuel levy one is one that we used to, okay? And, it's been a while since we actually even had a cut, so I don't know what
I'd like to see is a fuel levy and a cut in just the size of the public service.
The thing about it, right, so you could look at the public service, but, you also have to then look back and look at, what the consumer's done for the country and what the things like above inflation increases, and for unions, for governments, for retailers and the retail boom, and the likes of Capitec, which we were speaking about a little bit.
Do you have a Capitec card?
I don't. No, but it's got nothing to do. It's just a preference. I bank with whoever I bank with, and it's just a convenience.
And
thing.
It just
so
doesn't happen to be Capitec.
Yeah. No, but I think you can look at the negatives. But look at what some of these above inflation wage increase and the huge public sector wage bill has actually benefited. Okay, and all those inflows that have actually come in, and the investment that because of the buoyant South African consumer right now, things aren't looking great. But what I'm saying is, you can look at the negatives and you can look at the positives. And I'm saying even now with the negatives, or seemingly negatives, there's definitely still opportunity. We still hear right now investors speaking about looking at Brazil, where the currency is pretty much blown out. It's blown out as much as it can. It's already junk status, and you still have quality companies there, and guys will look for opportunities.
Surely VAT is the way to go.
No.
Why not?
No.
Because it's 1%, say. It's simple. It's easy to administer.
Why are we even talking about tax hikes? To me, this is fundamentally flawed. We have resigned ourselves that the way out of our fiscal situation is to have tax hikes. No. If you lower taxes, you generate high economic activity, which in turn improves your revenue into the fiscus. I'm ideologically perplexed by the situation.
I love this.
Look, so I'm ideologically perplexed at the whole way they go about things. I'm saying in the government's terms, if they're not going to privatize, they're not going to cut taxes. But they want the government to play a state
so what we
in
do
the economy.
Let's take out of the economy, look good for the next 24 months. Eke out all the potential growth that could come out and become a lackluster 0.8% growth economy. With unemployment that's burgeoning, with people, in fact, which excludes people indefinitely out of economic activity. The most vulnerable of society continually get the bitter end of this stick. So eke out, make the money look good, and we just go to the dogs, basically. You get downgraded, and you become a
Rabi?
Venezuela.
What was the phrase? How perplexed?
Ideologically perplexed.
Okay, I love it. So, Rabi, let's get your final comments, because we're going to go to break soon, and I do want you guys to comment on pay back some of the money. So, very quick one on the outlook of South Africa for you.
Look, I think outlook tough, difficult, but yeah, I've got to believe. I've got to believe in the story.
You are such an optimist.
I've got to believe in the opportunities. Like we spoke about cycles earlier, and we go through different cycles, but in those cycles you find opportunities, and that's just what it is. It's like companies that manage and have an outlook of zero growth. Let's look at this, right? So we chat to a lot of companies, and some companies, they base their whole strategy on assuming zero growth, right? On doing M&A and extracting efficiencies, and encouraging and upskilling their employees, and therefore that's how they in turn their growth. So what I'm saying is, there are companies and there are people who are built for this environment who find opportunities, but it's going to be difficult.
Okay, hashtag pay back the money. What do you make of it? Good move on the part of the president. Should we be celebrating? What's going on here?
Well, I don't know. He potentially received counsel. He seeks counsel from clever lawyers, etc. Well, maybe someone whispered in his ear that it makes a lot of sense. I don't know.
Second half of the question: do you have a Capitec card?
Caps is a beautiful bank. I may not have, but it's a beautiful bank.
It's a beautiful bank. Hashtag pay back some of the money. Good move on the part of the president.
I think probably in the long term, probably a good move for
Yeah.
South Africa and some of the implications that paying back the money could have.
And we know you don't have a Capitec card. Okay, fantastic. So a very big thank you to our guest, Rabi Thithi. He is equity sales trader at Avior Capital Markets,
And
as well as
Lesiba Mothata, who
Yes.
is chief economist at Investment Solutions.